The scrape of my suitcase wheels across his hardwood floor was louder than his words. "You need to leave, Mom." Still, I didn't cry. I just zipped the last pocket shut, like closing a chapter no one bothered to read. As his wife watched from the doorway, arms crossed, the scent of my Sunday roast still lingered in the air. While they stood there silent, I paused by the family photo, my face centered, already forgotten. The same frame I once paid for now stared back at me, empty. That's when I left, not just the house, but them, out of my will. Permanently. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The evening felt unusually quiet. The hum of the refrigerator was louder than normal, as though it too could sense the tension in the air. Evelyn sat at the dinner table, the soft click of the silverware against her plate punctuating the silence. She'd prepared a simple meal, roast chicken with vegetables, just the way Tom used to like it. But tonight, nothing tasted quite right. The house, once filled with the laughter of children and the clinking of dishes, felt empty, as though it too had been waiting for this moment. Tom sat across from her, the creases of his face deeper than the last time they'd shared a meal together. His eyes were focused on his plate, though he barely touched his food. Rachel, on the other hand, stared at her phone, scrolling through something that didn't seem to matter, her face a mask of practiced indifference. It was a small dinner, the three of them, and yet, Evelyn could feel the weight of the years pressing down on them all. She took a deep breath, her fingers briefly brushing the edge of the glass in front of her. It was always a small thing, a subtle habit when she was on edge. Just a movement, a soft signal to herself that she could still stay grounded. Tonight, though, even this seemed too loud. Finally, Rachel spoke, her voice sharp enough to break the quiet. "Evelyn," she began, her tone more casual than Evelyn had anticipated. "We've been talking." Evelyn didn't look up from her plate. She already knew. She could feel it in the air, the things unsaid, the glances that lingered too long. Rachel continued, her words precise, as if rehearsed. "It's just, well, it's been a lot lately. Tom's been under so much stress, and we've been talking about our future, and it's too much. We need space, Evelyn. Our own space." Evelyn's grip tightened around her fork. The words didn't sting, not yet, but they settled in her chest like a stone. She'd seen it coming, had felt the coldness between them grow with each passing day. Rachel's voice never wavered, but Evelyn noticed the slight shift in her posture, a subtle shift toward Tom, as though seeking confirmation for what she was saying. Evelyn didn't look at Tom. She didn't need to. His silence was louder than anything Rachel had said. He didn't look up from his plate, not once. His eyes remained fixed, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him like a burden he didn't know how to carry anymore. Rachel's voice rose slightly, as if to fill the empty space that had stretched between them. "It's just not working anymore. We've talked about it. We think it's time for you to move out, Evelyn." For a long moment, Evelyn remained still. The only sound in the room was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, each second falling away like the sand in an hourglass. She allowed herself one brief, quiet moment of reflection. Not out of sorrow, but out of a strange sense of clarity. She'd known, after all. Her son had been avoiding her eyes for weeks now, as though he could not bear to look at her. "All right," she said softly, her voice calm and steady, betraying none of the chaos inside her. Rachel's mouth opened as if she expected Evelyn to argue, to beg, but Evelyn didn't move. She didn't respond with anger, didn't let the words claw their way to the surface. She simply nodded, the finality of her agreement settling over her like a cloak. It was, in some strange way, a relief. Tom didn't speak. Not yet. He couldn't even meet her gaze. Evelyn stood up slowly, the wooden chair scraping softly against the floor, cutting through the silence. She didn't look back at them as she walked toward the hallway, her footsteps echoing lightly on the wooden floors. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though her body was saying goodbye to the years she had spent in this house, in this life. She didn't need to pack everything. She didn't need to take all the things that had once belonged to her, things that had accumulated over the years. She only took what mattered: clothes, a few old photographs, her journal. The rest she left behind, as though it too had already been forgotten by the people who had once been her family. The sound of drawers opening and closing was drowned out by the thudding of her own heartbeat in her ears. Her movements were deliberate, methodical. There was no anger in her, not even a trace of bitterness, just a quiet, resolute calm. But as she folded the last of her clothes, she felt something shift, a coldness, a shift in the weight of her choices. It wasn't the decision that made her pause. No, it was the realization that this moment, this night, was one she had seen coming long before the words were ever spoken. That she had allowed herself to live in the illusion of family for far too long, pretending that love could still be found in this broken home. The house was quiet now. The weight of her departure hung in the air like a fog. She didn't even hear Tom's footsteps as he walked toward the door, but she knew he was there. She knew his hesitation. When she was done, she walked to the door, took one last look around, and stepped into the hallway. Evelyn didn't say goodbye. There was no need. The sound of her footsteps grew fainter, and just as she reached the front door, she heard the faintest sound from behind her. It wasn't a word, just the distant sound of Tom's voice, muffled, broken, saying something she couldn't quite hear. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to listen. She opened the door and stepped into the night, the cool air wrapping around her like a promise. There was no turning back now. The apartment was small, but it felt vast with possibility. Evelyn stood by the window, gazing out at the quiet street below. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, casting soft light on the rows of houses that lined the block. It was a peaceful neighborhood, tucked away from the bustle of the world, as though it existed in a place outside of time where nothing could touch her. Nothing would ever remind her of the house she had just left behind. She'd found the apartment almost by accident, walking past it one afternoon after a long walk to clear her head. The for rent sign, faded by the sun but still legible, caught her attention. It had been a small decision, an impulsive one, yet somehow it felt like the only choice she had ever made that didn't weigh on her soul. Evelyn set her suitcase on the floor beside the bed, her fingers lingering on the fabric of the sheet as if testing whether it would welcome her. She already knew it would. This was her space, and no one would ever tell her she didn't belong here. She had learned that much already. The apartment was simple. A kitchen that opened into a cozy living room, a bedroom with a bed she had chosen herself, and a small bathroom that felt almost luxurious after the cramped confines of the house she had shared with Tom and Rachel. She hadn't brought much with her, just the essentials: a few clothes, a handful of photos, and the faded journal that had once been her confidant. She set the photos down on the small table by the window, studying the faces in them. There were pictures of Tom as a child, photos of her late husband and their life together, frozen in time like an old memory she wasn't sure how to handle anymore. Evelyn ran her fingers over the edges of the frames, but there was no pain in it, no sorrow, only a strange detached sense of closure. The first few days had been silent, but not lonely. She had expected loneliness to grip her at some point, to fill the space with an overwhelming void, but it hadn't happened. Instead, there was quiet. There was peace. There was a sense of being unburdened for the first time in years. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. A message from Jill. her best friend since the days when teaching was still something Evelyn did with passion, not obligation. She had told Jill only that morning about the move, and now, as if by magic, Jill had already planned a visit. "I can't believe you did it," Jill's message read. "But I knew you had it in you. Dinner tomorrow?" Evelyn smiled softly, grateful. "I'll be ready. Just bring yourself," she typed back, hitting send. Jill had always been the one to push her out of her comfort zone, to remind her that she was more than the quiet teacher and mother who had spent so much of her life giving to others. She was more than the woman who had silently tolerated the slow erosion of her relationship with Tom. In fact, Evelyn realized now, she had spent so long taking care of everyone else that she had forgotten the woman she was before any of them ever entered her life. That night, after a quick dinner she made just for herself, Evelyn went to a local senior citizen center she had discovered online. It wasn't much, just a small community space with a few tables set up for card games and knitting circles, but it was enough to give her a sense of connection. The women there spoke freely about their lives, their children, their joys and their losses, and for the first time in months, Evelyn felt like she wasn't alone in her struggle. These women, like her, had lived lives shaped by the hands of others, and now they were reclaiming their time. It was comforting to know she wasn't the only one. It was also empowering. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn attended more of these gatherings. She found herself taking up knitting, something she had never bothered with before, but now it felt soothing, like a tangible way of creating something for herself. She listened to the stories of the others, occasionally offering her own, though her voice felt strange, like a woman awakening from a long slumber. She didn't tell Tom or Rachel where she was staying. There was no need. She had made her decision. She wasn't a child anymore, nor was she the person who would let their opinions dictate her happiness. For the first time in her life, Evelyn realized she didn't need to answer to anyone but herself. One morning, after a quiet cup of tea and a brief meditation, Evelyn sat down at her small kitchen table. She stared at the blank page of her journal, a thought creeping into her mind, one she had avoided thinking about for weeks. Her will. She needed to change it. She had already felt the cold weight of their indifference in her last moments in that house, and she would not let them carry on as though nothing had changed. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. It wasn't out of anger, not at all. It was just a necessity. Her life had been in their hands for too long, and now she was taking it back. The estate she had once imagined leaving behind, Tom, Rachel, and even Luke, who she had always thought would stand by her, was no longer hers to give. She made the first mark. She would meet with a lawyer. It would be a difficult conversation, but she had already made peace with that. The weight of the pen in her hand felt heavier now, as though it carried all of her decisions in the curve of each letter. The ink would be her truth. As she finished writing the first few lines, she stopped. The weight of it all sank in, but it was a weight she would bear with grace. Just as she set down the pen, there was a knock at the door. It was Jill, her old friend, bringing with her the promise of new beginnings. But as Evelyn opened the door, she felt a strange sense of finality settle in her chest. She was ready for whatever came next. The office was small, tucked between a florist and a coffee shop, its sign discreet, almost unnoticeable. But to Evelyn, it felt like the right place. Quiet, private, just like the life she was now building for herself. She sat across from the lawyer, a woman with sharp glasses and a steady gaze, who had offered no judgments about Evelyn's decision to change her will. The room smelled faintly of vanilla, the scent of a candle burning in the corner, adding a sense of warmth to the otherwise sterile space. Evelyn had thought about this moment for days, weeks, really. But now that she was here, with the papers spread out before her, she felt no regret, no second guessing. This was the culmination of a lifetime's worth of choices. Choices that had been made for her, by others, for too long. Today, she was taking control. The lawyer slid a sheet of paper across the desk. "This is the first draft, Evelyn," she said, her voice even. "Let's go through it together." Evelyn's hands rested on the edges of the document, her fingers brushing over the words as if to imprint them into her mind. It all felt so final, so definitive. She removed Tom and Rachel as beneficiaries without a second thought. She didn't need to hear their names written on this paper anymore. Not after all that had happened. They would not inherit her things, her life's work. They had already taken enough. The house, her patience, her kindness. She had nothing left to give them. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about this, Evelyn?" Evelyn nodded. "Yes, I'm sure." Then came the more complicated part, the decision about Luke, her grandson. Her love for him was deep, rooted in the years she'd spent watching him grow. But she couldn't let her feelings cloud her judgment. Luke had been a part of her world, yes, but he had also been the one to bear the brunt of the dysfunction in Tom and Rachel's house. He was caught in the middle, always. Evelyn's fingers hovered over the words as she wrote her stipulation. Luke would receive his inheritance, but only once he proved his responsibility. He would have to show that he was willing to carry the weight of the family legacy before she left him with anything. Not a punishment, but a condition, a lesson in value, in responsibility. She had learned the hard way that nothing in this world should be given without it being earned. She paused. The pen felt heavier in her hand now. The words felt like the final echo of everything she'd been through, the silence at the dinner table, the hollow apologies that had followed. She was writing her legacy. Not just money or possessions, but lessons, values. As she continued, she added a final clause, one that she had never imagined putting into her will before, a charitable foundation. A space for the elderly to find independence, to reclaim their strength and dignity, just as she had. She could picture it now, a community, a place where people like her, people who had been discarded by their families or society, could come together, find support, and build their own lives again. It was the only thing that felt truly right, truly hers. "I've decided to establish a foundation," she said, her voice steady. "For elderly people who want to remain independent. It'll be called the Evelyn Morris Foundation." The lawyer gave her an approving nod. "A noble cause," she said, and Evelyn knew it wasn't just words. Her gaze fell on the papers once more. She had to finalize this. It wasn't just the law. It was her truth, written in black and white. This would be her final testament to herself. A reflection of her journey from silent submission to this moment of clarity. "I'll need a note for Tom," Evelyn said, as if it was the next logical step. "Something to explain my decision. Just a few words." The lawyer handed her a pen, and Evelyn, with careful, practiced movements, wrote the letter. Her handwriting was small but neat, the words flowing easily as she finally put everything into words that she'd kept hidden for too long. "I'm not a burden. I'm a woman of worth. This decision is mine. I'm not sorry for it. I never was." She paused after the last sentence, letting the words sink into her mind. For so long, she had been the one to apologize, the one to bend and stretch until she broke. But now, with a flick of the pen, she was finally free. Free of guilt. Free of expectations. When she finished, she sat back in the chair, feeling a strange peace settle over her. She'd never imagined this moment, but now that it was here, she could breathe. It wasn't about revenge, not in the way people often thought. It was about reclamation, taking back what was hers and doing it on her own terms. The lawyer filed the papers away in a neat folder, closing the lid with a soft snap. "Everything is in order," she said. "Is there anything else?" Evelyn shook her head. No, that's everything. The weight of the moment pressed down on her as she stood to leave. The door to the office opened with a soft click, and Evelyn stepped back into the world that was now hers. She didn't look back as she walked out, as though leaving behind the person she had once been. But as she reached the elevator, something tugged at her, a sharp, insistent thought. She had just changed everything. Not just for herself, but for Luke too. Would he ever understand? Would he ever know how much it had taken for her to get here? The elevator doors closed, cutting off her thoughts. But the question remained. And as Evelyn descended into the world below, the echo of that question lingered in her mind, unanswered, like the beginning of something new. The knock on the door came just as Evelyn had finished a quiet breakfast, the kind she'd grown to love since moving into her new apartment. The sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting light across the room and giving everything a peaceful, almost surreal glow. Her hands paused mid-motion as the sound echoed through the room, sharp and unexpected. It was a soft knock at first, almost hesitant, like someone unsure of their own presence. She placed the tea kettle down slowly, her gaze flickering to the door. She hadn't expected visitors, certainly not today, not after everything that had happened. A second, firmer knock followed by a voice. "Evelyn," came Tom's voice, raw and strained. "Please, open up. We need to talk." Her stomach churned slightly, a faint tightening in her chest, but she didn't move immediately. She had been waiting for this moment, knew it would come. Tom couldn't let it go. Not yet. And he wouldn't come alone. She rose from the table, her movements deliberate, unhurried. As she approached the door, her mind raced briefly, flashing back to the moments when she had walked away from everything. His silence at the table, Rachel's cold words, the heaviness of a life that had become too small. Her fingers rested on the doorknob for a brief moment, a silent acknowledgement of all she had left behind. When she opened the door, Tom stood there, his eyes weary, face drawn in a mixture of regret and desperation. Beside him was Luke, standing awkwardly, his eyes not meeting hers. The familiar face, the boy she had known since birth, was the one thing that made this visit harder than it should have been. But Evelyn steadied herself, her resolve firm. "Mom," Tom began, his voice cracking. He shifted his weight, and for a moment, Evelyn almost thought he might collapse right there. "We're sorry. We should have never asked you to leave." Luke looked up then, his expression caught somewhere between guilt and confusion. He seemed to shrink back, as though he wasn't entirely sure where he fit into this moment. His eyes met hers, and the silent plea in them was unmistakable. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. She'd known this was coming. She had anticipated his apology, Tom's forced attempt to fix something that couldn't be undone with words. The silence stretched out between them, heavy and thick. Tom continued, his words tumbling out faster now, desperate. "It's been hard, Evelyn. You know how Rachel is. He broke off, as if searching for the right words. But there was no need to explain further. She had seen it. She had lived it. His silence spoke louder than any excuse he could offer. Evelyn remained still, her gaze unwavering. She had spent too many years excusing his silence, excusing Rachel's indifference. No more. This wasn't about forgiving them. It wasn't about going back to the place where things had gone wrong. This was about moving forward. Something she had learned in these last few weeks. She was done waiting for them to see her worth. "I've made my decision, Tom," she said quietly, her voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of finality. "I can't go back to that life. I won't. It's over." The words seemed to hang in the air, and Tom's face fell as though he'd been struck. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but no sound came out. Luke shifted on his feet, his face a mask of confusion and concern. His eyes darted between Tom and Evelyn, the tension between them palpable. "Grandma, please," Luke said finally, his voice soft, almost pleading. He stepped forward, his eyes wide with uncertainty. "I don't want you to go. I don't want things to be like this. We can fix it. We can go back to the way things were." Evelyn's heart ached at the sight of him. He was still a boy in many ways, still trying to hold together a fractured family. But she could see the strain in him too, the weight of the battles fought in silence, the way he had grown up in a house that had always been just one argument away from breaking. She knelt down to his level, her hands gentle on his shoulders as she looked into his eyes. "Luke, I love you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I can't go back to that life. It's not good for any of us. You have to understand that." He shook his head, his lips trembling, but he didn't speak. Instead, he just reached out, pulling her into a tight hug. For a long moment, Evelyn held him close, inhaling the familiar scent of his hair, feeling the warmth of his body against hers. It was the last time she would hold him like this, she knew. But it was the only way she could leave, by letting go. "Don't forget who you are," she whispered into his ear, a final lesson wrapped in love. "Don't let them change you." She pulled away, holding his gaze one last time. There was pain in his eyes, but there was understanding there too. He might not fully understand why she was doing this, but at least he would remember. Evelyn stood up then, her back straight, her voice even as she spoke to Tom. "I won't go back, Tom. I can't. This is my life now, and I'm not going to let you take it from me again." For a moment, Tom just stood there, defeated, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had settled on them. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Slowly, he turned, taking Luke's hand in his, and without another word, they left. Evelyn watched them walk down the hallway, Tom's face still etched with guilt, Luke's eyes lingering on her as if he might turn back at any moment. But he didn't. They didn't. And when the door clicked shut behind them, Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The silence that followed was hers to own now. No more arguments, no more broken promises. Just peace. But as she turned back into her apartment, the weight of her decision settled over her like a cloak. She had closed that door, for good this time, and there would be no turning back. Evelyn sat at her work table, the rhythmic hum of the sewing machine filling the silence of her apartment. The fabric, colorful, soft cottons and intricate florals, slipped through her fingers as she expertly stitched together a quilt that would soon be part of her new venture. Her hands moved with purpose, the needle dancing through the layers, creating something beautiful and meaningful with every stitch. It had been weeks since she had made the decision to leave Tom and Rachel's house, and yet each day that passed felt like a new chapter. The apartment, once filled with the uncertainty of a fresh start, now felt like home. She had arranged it just so, her quilts displayed proudly along the walls, a cozy armchair by the window for reading or reflection, and an airy kitchen where she could sip her tea and dream of all the possibilities. Her business, which had started as a quiet hobby, was beginning to grow. Word had spread in the neighborhood about Evelyn's handmade quilts and crafts. The local coffee shop sold her pieces, and a few small boutiques had reached out to display them. It wasn't much yet, but it was hers. The feeling of building something from scratch, after so many years of having everything decided for her, was intoxicating. She had joined a senior entrepreneur group, a network of women who had decided, much later in life, to start businesses of their own. Their stories were different, yet the same. Each woman had a dream that had waited too long, buried beneath years of family obligations, children, and responsibilities. Now, they were here, united by a shared understanding that it wasn't too late to take control of their lives. Evelyn loved the energy in those meetings, the laughter, the creative sparks flying as ideas were exchanged. It wasn't just about business, it was about reclaiming power, carving out space in a world that had long overlooked them. They supported each other, traded advice on everything from marketing to managing stress. They celebrated each other's victories, no matter how small. One woman, Linda, had been a nurse for 30 years before retiring and finding a passion for painting. Now she sold her artwork in galleries and had started giving painting classes for other seniors. Another woman, Margaret, had been a stay-at-home mom for decades, but was now running a successful bakery out of her kitchen. They all had their own stories of courage, of facing down their fears and pushing forward. Through this group, Evelyn found herself drawn into organizing local charity events and fundraisers. Jill, always a steady presence in her life, was right there beside her. Together, they had planned bake sales, craft fairs, and donation drives to support senior services in the community. Evelyn found joy in these moments, helping others, offering her expertise, and knowing that her time was being spent in ways that truly mattered. The quiet strength she had once kept hidden, buried beneath years of silence, now radiated outward. Her newfound independence had given her a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. And with it came recognition. A local newspaper did a feature on her business and charity work. The headline reading, "Evelyn Morris, a woman who found her voice after 72 years." It was the validation she hadn't known she needed. But perhaps the most surprising development came in the form of Luke. He had started visiting her regularly, at first under the guise of checking in, but it didn't take long for him to develop a genuine interest in what she was doing. He started spending time with her in the evenings, watching as she quilted, learning how to measure and cut the fabric, even trying his hand at sewing some stitches. The first time Luke made a mistake with the sewing machine. He had laughed nervously, but Evelyn just smiled and gently corrected him. "There's no such thing as a mistake. Just a new opportunity to learn," she told him. And for the first time in years, she saw the boy he could become, a man capable of owning his decisions, of building his own future. "I never realized how much work goes into these," Luke said one evening, his voice a mix of awe and admiration. "I don't think I ever really saw you, Grandma." Evelyn looked up from the quilt she was working on and met his gaze. "Sometimes we don't see what's right in front of us until we take the time to look," she said, her words layered with meaning. "It's never too late to see things differently, Luke. You're learning that now." As her bond with Luke deepened, Evelyn knew it was more than just quilting and charity work that was helping her rebuild. It was her sense of self, of reclaiming her place in the world, that had allowed her to open up, to be seen for who she truly was. Meanwhile, Tom and Rachel's life at home had only become more strained. Rachel, unable to let go of her pride, pressured Tom to fix things with his mother. It was as if he were caught between two worlds, one in which he resented his mother for being a burden, and the other in which he regretted pushing her away. Evelyn didn't concern herself with their troubles anymore. She had enough on her plate, and she wasn't looking back. The phone buzzed beside her on the table, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Jill, who was eager to share the news of another event they had been planning for the community, an arts and crafts auction to benefit the elderly. It was exactly the kind of project Evelyn had always dreamed of being a part of. And just like that, Evelyn realized she had already won. Not in the way she had once imagined. No, her victory was more than just proving her worth to her family. It was about proving it to herself. The quilt she was working on, the one she had just finished, was more than just fabric and thread. It was the embodiment of her journey, pieces of a life that had been torn apart and carefully stitched back together. She ran her fingers over the finished work, a smile tugging at her lips. This was hers. This was her life. But as she carefully folded it, a thought crept into her mind. Would Tom ever understand? Would he ever realize the sacrifice she had made for them to see her, to hear her? She wasn't sure. And for the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel the need for an answer. She was enough, just as she was. Evelyn hadn't expected to see him again. She had moved past the idea of Tom ever stepping into her life in any meaningful way after everything that had transpired. The doorbell rang unexpectedly one afternoon, its chime cutting through the soft, peaceful stillness of the apartment. Evelyn paused, her hand hovering over the quilt she was stitching. The rhythmic motion of the sewing machine stilled for the first time that day. When she opened the door, there he was, Tom, standing awkwardly on her doorstep. His clothes were a little disheveled, his hair a bit unkempt. His eyes red-rimmed as though he had been fighting off exhaustion or a deep, unspoken regret. He stood there for a moment, looking lost, before his eyes met hers, and for the first time in what felt like ages, Evelyn saw something in him, a faint glimmer of the sun she had once known. "Mom," Tom said softly, almost too quietly for Evelyn to hear. There was no anger in his voice, no defensive edge like there had been before. Instead, it was raw, laced with something she couldn't quite place. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had seen so many times before when he was uncertain. I wanted to talk. I've been thinking about everything, about what happened. I'm sorry, Mom." Evelyn stood in the doorway for a long moment, silent. Her heart, which had been so heavy with all that had transpired, felt strangely calm now. She had imagined this moment so many times, built it up in her mind as something that might bring her closure. But as she looked at Tom, standing there vulnerable and exposed, she realized that closure wasn't something he could give her. "I know it's been hard," he continued, his voice shaking slightly. "Rachel, she's been pressuring me, and I didn't know what to do. I should have handled it better, Mom. I should have never let things get so bad." Evelyn's eyes remained steady on him, her expression unchanged. She had heard his apologies before, countless times. But this time, there was something different. The regret in his eyes was genuine. The way he spoke lacked the excuses that used to fill the spaces between his words. And yet, she knew it wasn't enough. The damage had already been done. "I appreciate your apology, Tom," Evelyn said, her voice calm, not betraying the anger she had expected to feel. "But you can't undo the damage with words." Her tone was measured, even, though inside, a quiet sorrow lingered. She had spent too many years accepting the hollow promises, the words that never matched the actions. Tom's shoulders slumped slightly, as if the weight of her words had settled into him. He shifted on his feet, trying to find something to say, some way to fix it. I know I messed up. I just want to make things right. I don't want you to leave our lives for good. We need you, Mom." There it was again. The familiar plea, the same one he'd given her when things got difficult. But Evelyn didn't move. She didn't feel the need to explain herself, not anymore. She wasn't going to argue with him about something that had already been decided. "You don't understand, Tom," she said softly but firmly. "It's not about needing me. It's about respecting me. For years, I was pushed aside, ignored, and treated like I was a burden. And now that I've found my way again, you want me to come back? To slip into that same old role? I can't do that. Not anymore." Tom's face contorted in confusion and frustration, as if the pieces weren't quite fitting together in his mind. Mom, please. You're my mother. I don't want to lose you." "I'm not asking you to lose me, Tom," Evelyn replied. Her voice softened just a fraction, but there was steel behind the words. But you've already made your choice, and so have I. I can't go back to that life. I've already left it behind, and I won't return to it. The silence that followed was thick, as though the years of unspoken words and unresolved hurts hung heavily in the air between them. Tom opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His eyes were a mix of disbelief and something else. Perhaps guilt. Perhaps something deeper. Evelyn saw it, but it didn't matter anymore. She had made peace with her decision long ago. After a moment, Tom sighed, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of his own indecision had finally worn him down. His lips parted again, but this time he didn't try to argue. He simply nodded, a quiet acceptance in his gaze, though his face still carried that look of sorrow. "Okay," he said, the word barely audible, like it was too heavy to say aloud. I understand." Evelyn stepped back slightly, her gaze softening just enough to convey the finality of the moment. "Goodbye, Tom," she said quietly, almost as if it were a whisper meant only for him. "Take care of yourself." Tom nodded again, his eyes lingering on her, a mixture of longing and defeat in them. Without another word, he turned away, walking back down the hallway, leaving Evelyn standing at the door, the air thick with a quiet kind of finality. When she closed the door behind him, she didn't feel relief, nor did she feel anger. Instead, there was only peace, a sense of something done, something closed. A chapter that had ended long before she had stepped away. As the sound of Tom's footsteps faded into the distance, Evelyn stood still for a moment, taking it all in. It was done. He had made his choice, and so had she. And for the first time, Evelyn knew with absolute certainty that she was enough, just as she was. The days stretched out in a quiet rhythm. Morning light streamed through the windows of Evelyn's apartment, illuminating the stacks of quilts she had sewn with care and dedication. What had begun as a small business was now growing steadily. Her phone rang more often than it ever had before. Calls from boutiques, galleries, and local stores eager to feature her handcrafted pieces. Orders came in, and Evelyn, with her calm, steady hands, was creating something new, not just for her clients, but for herself. The success was slow but sure, and with it came a quiet satisfaction Evelyn had never experienced before. Her name was starting to get recognized, not just for her quilts, but for the woman behind them. One afternoon, she was invited to be the subject of a feature article in a local magazine. The headline read, "Evelyn Morris, Inspiring Women in Their Golden Years." When the article came out, Evelyn couldn't help but smile as she read the words. At 72, Evelyn Morris is proving that it's never too late to start over, the writer had penned. She had become more than a small business owner. She had become a role model for others, women who had faced their own struggles, their own silences, and had found ways to rise above them. Evelyn had become proof that resilience, passion, and a little bit of courage could turn any dream into reality. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced down at the message. It was from Jill. "We've got a speaking gig," it read. "They want you to talk at the seniors conference next month about your journey, your business, and your charity work. They think you're an inspiration." Evelyn sat back in her chair, her hands resting on the fabric she was working with. Her life had changed in ways she hadn't imagined. From the woman who had once been pushed aside to the woman who now stood at the front of a room, inspiring others to follow their own path. She smiled, a sense of pride warming her heart. She wasn't just running a business anymore. She was building a community. Luke continued to visit regularly, the boy she had once held so tightly now growing into a young man, more confident, more self-assured. He had become an active part of her business, often helping her with marketing ideas, setting up her online store, and even learning how to sew. His awkwardness around her was slowly disappearing. Instead, He was taking on the responsibility of being a part of her new life, his grandmother's life. I don't know why I never noticed this before, Luke said one evening as they worked side by side on a new quilt design. You've been creating your own world all along, Grandma. It's like I never saw the person behind all the quilts. Evelyn smiled as she looked at him, the young man in front of her no longer just the child she had known. You've always had a lot of potential, Luke. Sometimes you just need the right place to let it bloom. Meanwhile, the tension between Tom and Rachel had continued to build, like a slow burn. Rachel had pressured Tom to fix things with his mother, but Tom, torn between guilt and the resentment he couldn't quite shake, found himself unable to take action. Their marriage had become a battlefield of unspoken frustrations. He couldn't fix the years of distance, of emotional neglect, and Rachel's demands only pushed him further away from any solution. Evelyn heard snippets of their struggles, not through the walls of their home, but through the murmurs of others, the gossip that spread like wildfire. It didn't matter to her anymore. She had let go of the need for reconciliation. She was no longer tied to their chaos. Instead, she poured her energy into something else entirely, helping other women. Inspired by her own success, she started a mentorship program for older women who had dreams of their own, who were looking for the courage to step out and start something new, to find a way to break free from the boxes that life had put them in. The group met weekly, and Evelyn shared her journey, her triumphs, and the challenges she faced. Her words resonated deeply. She was a living example of reinvention, proof that it was possible to begin again at any stage in life. The group grew as women from all walks of life reached out to join, eager to learn from someone who had been there. Evelyn also began to focus more on her charity work, planning community spaces for seniors who wanted to remain independent but needed support to do so. She used her platform, her business, to fundraise for those in need. She didn't just want to be known for her quilts. She wanted to leave a legacy, a place where people, especially the elderly, could find their voices, just as she had found hers. I've been thinking, Evelyn said one day to Jill as they sat over coffee. I want to start something bigger, a place, a center for elderly people to find support, to share their stories. We need a space where they're not just seen as old people waiting to be taken care of. We need to give them a voice. Jill nodded, clearly inspired. I think it's a brilliant idea, Evelyn. You've already changed so many lives, including your own. It's time to take it to the next level. Evelyn smiled, the spark in her eyes igniting once more. It's time, Jill. Time to help others live their lives, just as I'm living mine. The sound of her sewing machine hummed steadily in the background, a soft reminder that her journey, her story, was far from over. It had only just begun. The cafe smelled of fresh coffee and warm pastries, a comforting mix of scents that once would have soothed Evelyn's nerves. But today, they only made her feel more distant, as though she were watching her past unfold from a place far removed, a spectator to her own story. She sat by the window, the morning light casting soft shadows across the table where a cup of tea sat, still steaming, untouched. When Rachel walked in, she hesitated for a moment, scanning the room as though unsure whether she was walking into an unfamiliar place. But Evelyn knew. She always knew. Her posture was tight, shoulders stiff with the weight of whatever apology she had rehearsed, and her steps faltered as she approached the table. Evelyn didn't rise. She simply watched her daughter-in-law sit down, a polite smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. There was no warmth in the gesture, no attempt to close the chasm that had widened between them. Rachel hadn't changed. She still wore that air of superiority, that sense of entitlement, as though she were doing Evelyn some kind of favor by showing up. "Hi," Rachel said softly, the word hanging between them like a fragile thread. She seemed uncomfortable, as though unsure how to approach Evelyn after everything that had happened. "I'm glad we could finally meet." Evelyn nodded, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. She had imagined this meeting 1,000 times, playing out every possible scenario in her mind. But none of them prepared her for the emptiness that was now there, between the two of them. Rachel spoke again, her voice a bit more steady now. I just wanted to apologize, Evelyn, for everything. I've been thinking about how we left things, and I regret it. I should have never asked you to leave, especially the way I did." She paused, her gaze shifting down to the table. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you." Evelyn heard the apology. She didn't need to hear it again. She had already given up the hope of ever receiving the kind of apology that would heal the rift between them. The words fell flat, empty. They didn't carry the weight of sincerity. "You're sorry," Evelyn said softly, almost to herself, her eyes not leaving Rachel's face. "But you've never asked how I felt, Rachel. You never once considered my side in all of this." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that she hadn't realized was there until now. A quiet fury, the kind that had been building for years, but had never found its outlet. Rachel's face shifted, a flash of defensiveness crossing her features before she could mask it. She opened her mouth to respond, but Evelyn didn't give her the chance. "It's too late for that," Evelyn interrupted, her tone firm, unyielding. "You've shown me who you are. And who you are, what you're willing to do to keep up appearances, to maintain control. It's not someone I want to be around anymore." The words stung, but Rachel didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice sharp with frustration. "I don't understand. All I ever wanted was a family, a perfect family. And you just, you never understood." Evelyn cut her off, leaning forward herself now, her hands flat against the table. "You never understood what it meant to be part of a family, Rachel. It's not about control or perfection. It's about respect. And you never gave me that." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the silence settled between them like a physical barrier, one that couldn't be crossed with mere words. Evelyn looked at Rachel, seeing the frustration in her eyes, but she couldn't summon the empathy she had once felt. Not anymore. She had tried, so many times, to make this work, to be the one who reached across the distance, to smooth things over. But it had only worn her down, hollowed her out. She wasn't going to do that anymore. "I'm done, Rachel," Evelyn said quietly, the words almost a whisper, but they carried the finality of a door slamming shut. "I'm done trying to fix something that was never really broken. I'm not your burden, and I won't let you treat me like one." Rachel's eyes flashed with something: anger, disbelief, maybe even hurt. But Evelyn didn't flinch. This was her choice, her life. And she wasn't going to let Rachel's disappointment or rage drag her back into the place she'd been before. Rachel pushed her chair back abruptly, the scrape of it against the floor sharp in the quiet cafe. She stood quickly, her hand clutching her purse as though it were a shield. "I can't believe you're being like this," she muttered, turning away without another word. Evelyn stayed seated, her hands still resting gently on the table, but inside, there was a shift. A lightness that had not been there before. She watched Rachel leave, her steps quick and angry, but Evelyn didn't feel the usual pang of regret. There was nothing left to fix. As Rachel's figure disappeared out the door, Evelyn let out a long breath, a slow exhale that felt like the release of years of tension. For the first time, she was free. She had walked away from the past, from the need for validation, from the toxic pull of a relationship that had never been about her at all. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the weight of the decision lift off her shoulders. The door had been closed. There was no going back. She didn't need Rachel's approval. She didn't need anyone's approval anymore. It was just Evelyn now, standing in the quiet aftermath of a life rebuilt. And for the first time in a long while, she felt truly whole. The world was waiting for her, and this time, she was ready. The evening light was fading, casting a golden glow over Evelyn's apartment as she worked, the hum of the sewing machine soothing in the background. She was putting the final stitches into a quilt that would soon be part of a fundraiser for the senior center she'd been supporting. The rhythm of her work, the familiar pull of the fabric beneath her hands, was a comfort. Something constant in the midst of the changes she had embraced over the last few months. But tonight, there was something different in the air. She could feel it. The soft knock on her door interrupted her focus, and when she opened it, she was met with the familiar face of her grandson, Luke. He stood in the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his gaze avoiding hers. "Grandma," he said, his voice small, as though carrying a weight he wasn't sure how to put into words. Evelyn stepped aside, letting him in. "What's on your mind, Luke?" she asked, her voice gentle but steady. Luke hesitated before sitting down at the small table by the window, his hands restless as he looked out at the fading light. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said quietly. "About everything. About you. About Mom and Dad." Evelyn took a seat across from him, watching him closely. She could see the strain in his posture, the tension in his shoulders. He was struggling, torn in ways she could see, but couldn't fully understand. "It's a lot, isn't it?" she said softly. "The fighting, the tension. It's hard when the people you love are so caught up in their own struggles. But you don't have to choose sides, Luke." Luke let out a heavy sigh, his gaze finally meeting hers, his eyes filled with a confusion he hadn't yet sorted through. "I don't know, Grandma. I feel like I'm stuck in the middle of everything. I love both Mom and Dad, but they're constantly at each other, and it's like I can't win. I can't make it stop. And it feels like if I pick one side over the other, I'm betraying the other. And you." His voice faltered for a moment, and he looked down, unable to meet her eyes. Evelyn's heart ached for him. She had always known how caught in the middle Luke had been, how much pressure he carried, and how, despite everything, he had tried so hard to keep the peace. "Luke, you don't have to choose," she said gently, reaching out to place a hand on his. "You're not responsible for their marriage, and you're not responsible for fixing what's broken between them. You don't owe anyone anything except the truth of who you are." Luke's eyes brimmed with emotion, but he swallowed it down, trying to keep the tears at bay. "I just feel like I didn't do enough for you. When everything happened, when you left, I didn't support you like I should have. I didn't stand up for you when you needed me most." His voice broke, and the guilt in his words cut deep, deeper than anything Evelyn had expected. Evelyn's chest tightened at the weight of his words, but she gently cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing away the start of tears. "You didn't know what to do, Luke. And you were just a kid, trying to make sense of everything. But you don't need to carry that guilt. It's not yours to hold." Her voice was soft, but firm, each word an assurance that he needed more than anything right now. "You've always been my light, Luke. You're more than enough." Luke's face twisted with pain. "But I could have done more. I should have done more." Evelyn shook her head. "No. Sweetheart, you don't have to be anyone's savior. You don't have to fix anyone's mistakes, especially not mine or your parents." She smiled, a quiet, tender smile, full of wisdom that only someone who had lived through it could understand. "What matters now is that you live your life with love and honesty and strength. And you start by being true to yourself." There was a long pause as Luke processed her words. The silence felt like a turning point, the weight of everything he had carried inside him slowly lifting. He nodded, his expression softening. I think I get it now, he said quietly. I don't have to fix everything. I just need to be me. Evelyn squeezed his hand. That's all anyone can ask of you, Luke. Just be you. The rest will fall into place. A small, relieved smile tugged at Luke's lips, and he finally met her gaze with a sense of quiet understanding. I'm sorry, Grandma, he whispered. Evelyn smiled back, her heart swelling with love for him. No need to apologize. We're okay, you and I. Always have been. The weight of years of tension, guilt, and confusion seemed to have finally lifted from Luke's shoulders. He sat back, a little more at ease, as if a long-held breath had been released. Thanks, Grandma, he said, his voice thick with gratitude. I'll spend more time here, helping you with your business, with the charity stuff. I want to be part of this. I want to help. Evelyn's smile widened, the pride in her chest growing. I'd love that, Luke. You've got a place here. Always. As the evening deepened and they worked together on her latest craft project, Evelyn found herself looking at her grandson with new eyes. He was no longer the boy caught in the middle of an adult world, but a young man stepping into his own life, unburdened by the weight of others' choices. And in that moment, Evelyn knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The sound of the sewing machine filled the air again, steady and sure. Together, they moved forward. The phone sat quietly on the table, its screen dark, a reminder of everything Evelyn had decided to leave behind. She hadn't checked it in days. The silence had become her peace, her sanctuary from the world that had once dictated her every move. Tom's messages had started a few weeks ago, just after the last meeting with Rachel. At first, there had been the usual questions. Are you okay? I'm sorry. Can we talk? But after a while, the messages turned into desperate pleas. Please, Mom. Let's fix this. We need you, please. But Evelyn knew better than to believe these words now. The first few times she had read them. Each text stung like an open wound she wasn't ready to touch. She had responded at first, cautiously, with short answers, but each time the conversations felt more like obligations than genuine connection. Eventually, she stopped replying. Her silence was loud. Louder than any conversation they could have had. She had given them years of her life, years of trying to keep the peace, of bending herself to fit their expectations. And now, she was done. The quiet became a shield, a way to guard herself from the emotional tug-of-war they'd tried to pull her into again. Evelyn poured herself a cup of tea, the steam rising in delicate tendrils. She sat by the window, looking out at the small garden she had started on the balcony, a symbol of her new life, of something she had planted and nurtured with her own hands. The flowers had begun to bloom, and it filled her with quiet pride. This was hers, all of it. The peace, the choice to move forward, to leave behind the ghosts of the past. The phone buzzed again, a familiar vibration that cut through the stillness. She glanced at it, seeing Tom's name flash on the screen. Her finger hovered over the screen for a moment. Then she set the phone down without responding. She didn't need to read the message. She already knew what it said. Evelyn took another sip of tea, closing her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth seep through her chest. It had taken time, but she had finally found her footing, the woman she had once been, submissive, apologetic. The one who tried to fix everything was gone. In her place was someone who could sit in silence and not feel the pressure to explain herself. She had nothing left to prove. She thought about all the things she had done in the months since her departure from Tom and Rachel's home. Her business was thriving. The quilts, the crafts. Her work had become something she was proud of. But more than that, she had begun to feel like herself again. She was no longer weighed down by the expectations of others, by the constant need to be what they wanted her to be. She was her own person now, and that was enough. But there were still moments when the silence felt heavy, when the absence of her family left a hollow space in her chest. It wasn't loneliness, not exactly. It was a quiet grief. The kind you feel when you realize that something you've held onto for so long has finally slipped away. Still, she wasn't going to chase them anymore. She wasn't going to go back to a life where her worth was dictated by others. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Tom. But this time, Evelyn didn't even look at it. She knew she was doing the right thing. The silence was her answer now. It was louder than any words could ever be. She spent the day working in her studio, putting together a new collection for a charity event she was organizing. The creative process was freeing, and as she worked, the weight of the past lifted. The more she poured herself into the charity, into the women she was helping, the more she realized just how far she had come. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. Later that afternoon, Luke stopped by, as he often did now. They had developed a routine, working together on her business, organizing charity events, talking about life. It wasn't just about the quilts anymore. It was about the bond they had built, something that felt more real than anything else in her life. He was more than her grandson. He was her partner in this new life she was building. "Grandma," Luke said, sitting beside her at the table, his eyes scanning the stack of papers she had just sorted through. "You've really been killing it with these events. People are starting to notice. Have you seen this?" He held up a letter, an official-looking envelope. Evelyn took the letter from him and opened it carefully. It was from a charity organization, thanking her for her contributions to the community. They were formally recognizing her efforts and inviting her to an award ceremony next month. She smiled as she read the words. It wasn't about the recognition, but about the fact that her work was having an impact. Her life had become more than just a fight for survival. She was making a difference. "Well, look at that," Evelyn said, her voice warm with pride. "I think they finally noticed." Luke grinned, his face lighting up with pride. "Of course they did. You've been changing lives, Grandma." Evelyn set the letter down and looked at him, a sense of gratitude swelling inside her. "It's all because of you too, Luke. I couldn't have done this without your support." Luke's smile softened, and for a moment, Evelyn saw the young man he was becoming. He was no longer burdened by the weight of the past. He had found his place, just as she had. The phone buzzed again, but this time, Evelyn didn't even think about it. She was no longer waiting for Tom to reach out. She had already moved on. She was no longer looking back. As Luke continued talking about their upcoming event, Evelyn felt a wave of peace wash over her. She was exactly where she needed to be. And then, as if on cue, her phone went silent. The world, for the first time in years, felt quiet in a way that was no longer painful, but freeing. She didn't need anyone's approval. She didn't need to explain herself anymore. This was her life, and she was finally living it. The room was quiet, save for the faint scratch of Evelyn's pen as she signed the final document. The lawyer, a steady woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense approach, slid another sheet across the desk for her to initial. The paperwork felt heavy, though not in a burdensome way. This was Evelyn's choice, her legacy. She was ensuring that the life she had worked so hard to build would be protected, that her values would live on beyond her. Evelyn picked up the pen again, her hand steady as she signed. There was a deep sense of finality in it. Not a sad finality, but one that marked the closing of a chapter, a solidifying of a path she had chosen long ago. She wasn't doing this for anyone's approval anymore. She wasn't doing it for Tom or Rachel. This was for her, and for the future she had built from the ashes of her past. She signed the final page of the will, her name flowing in neat, purposeful strokes across the paper. She leaned back in her chair, taking a moment to look at the document in front of her. It was simple, clear, and to the point. It felt right. The lawyer handed her a folder with all the finalized papers. "Everything is in order, Evelyn," she said, her voice calm but respectful. "Your legacy will be well protected." Evelyn nodded, her gaze resting on the folder. "I know," she said quietly. It feels like a weight has been lifted. The trust she had set up for Luke was the most important part. She had structured it so that he would receive his inheritance only when he proved he was ready, when he showed that he could handle the responsibility, the legacy she was leaving him. It wasn't about punishment. It was about teaching him the value of earning something, of showing maturity before he was handed what she had worked her entire life to build. She had also established a scholarship in her late husband's name. It was a memorial to the man she had once loved, but it wasn't for Tom. No, Tom would have no claim on it. Evelyn had made sure of that. The scholarship would go to students who needed financial help, those who wanted to change their lives the way she had changed hers. It felt right. Her husband's name, but her own vision, her own purpose. Tom would never understand that. "I've done everything I can for you, Luke," Evelyn said, as she set the folder down and looked at her grandson, who had come in to meet her after the signing. Luke had been by her side more than ever lately, and the pride she felt for him was undeniable. He had come into his own, shedding the guilt and confusion that had once weighed him down. He had begun to take ownership of his future, not just for himself, but for the community they were building together. Luke, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, finally spoke. "You've taken care of me more than anyone ever has, Grandma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. This is all I could ever want." Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You don't have to thank me, Luke. This is yours because you've earned it. And now you have a chance to build something even greater, something that lasts." She took a deep breath, her gaze drifting to the window where the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light over the apartment. The garden she had started so long ago bloomed outside, a symbol of everything she had nurtured in her life. Not just the plants, but the relationships, the business, the charity work. It was all part of her, all part of her legacy. As Luke looked at her, she could see the quiet understanding in his eyes. He wasn't just looking at her as his grandmother anymore. He was looking at her as a mentor, as a guide, as someone who had lived a full life and had much to offer. He had seen her struggle, seen her fight for independence, and now he saw the fruits of that labor. He knew the path he was on, and it was one he could walk with her by his side. "I want to be part of this, Grandma," Luke said, his voice steady now, more sure of himself. "Not just the business, but everything. I want to help you build this legacy. I want to take what you've started and make it something even bigger." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes softening. "You already are, Luke, and you always will be." As the lawyer left, leaving them alone with their thoughts, Evelyn felt a profound sense of peace. She had built a life from nothing, reclaimed what was lost, and now she was leaving something far more valuable than money. She was leaving wisdom, purpose, and strength. She had given Luke a foundation to stand on, one that would carry him far beyond the mistakes of the past. And as she sat there with him, side by side, she knew that her legacy would live on through him. It wasn't just in the inheritance she had set aside for him, but in the lessons she had taught him, the lessons of resilience, of finding strength in the face of adversity, of building something that mattered. She had always feared that her life would be defined by the mistakes of those who came before her. But now, as she looked at Luke, she saw that it would be defined by something far more lasting: love, strength, and the courage to change. Evelyn didn't need Tom's approval. She didn't need Rachel's validation. She had everything she needed right here, in this moment. And with that, she knew that her legacy was secure. It was already in motion, and it was only just beginning. The knock came just as the light began to fade from the sky, the evening settling over the apartment in soft shadows. Evelyn had just finished a cup of tea, the warmth still lingering in her chest. The sounds of her sewing machine from earlier were now replaced by the quiet hum of the refrigerator. It was peaceful, undisturbed. She didn't need to look at the door to know who it was. She could feel it. She had known this moment would come. Tom was standing on the other side, his silhouette framed by the dim hallway light. She could see the hesitance in his posture, the way his hands twisted together, the way his head was slightly bowed. The son who had once been so sure of himself, so full of the belief that he could shape the world around him, was now standing there, vulnerable and uncertain. Evelyn had thought this would be harder. She had imagined this conversation, this final meeting, would break her. But instead, it felt almost anticlimactic. It was simply another moment in the long series of moments that had led her here. The door was already closed. There was nothing left to say. She opened it slowly, her expression calm, neutral. Not cold, but not warm either. Not welcoming. Not anymore. "Tom," she said quietly, her voice steady. She didn't invite him in, didn't make any moves toward reconciliation. She simply stood there, waiting. Tom didn't speak right away. He shifted his weight, his eyes looking at the floor before they finally met hers. His voice, when it came, was low, almost defeated. "I've been thinking a lot, Mom," he began, his words hesitant, "about everything, about how things went between us, and I know I made a lot of mistakes." Evelyn stood still, her hands folded in front of her, but her gaze never wavered from him. She could feel the weight of his apology, but she also knew it wasn't enough. It couldn't undo the years of pain, of neglect, of silence. She had already walked away. She had already moved on. "I don't know where I went wrong," Tom continued, his voice thick with regret. "But I want to fix this. I want to fix us, Mom. I never meant for things to get so bad between us. I should have done more. Said more." Evelyn took a breath, her chest rising slowly. She had listened to these same words before. The promises, the apologies, the desperate attempts to patch things up. But now, they didn't touch her. They didn't stir anything inside her. She had learned, over the years, that words without actions were nothing but empty noise. "I've heard all of this before, Tom," she said softly, her voice carrying a calm finality. "The apologies, the promises to change. But I'm not waiting for you to fix anything anymore." Tom opened his mouth, as though to protest, but Evelyn held up a hand, silencing him. There was no need for explanations. There was no need for more words. Not anymore. "You've already said everything you need to say," she continued, her voice quiet but unyielding. "There's nothing more to add." Tom stood there, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of her words was too much for him to bear. His face was tight with regret, but there was something else there too, a realization that he had lost something, that he had let it slip through his fingers and there was no way to get it back. No amount of pleading, no more apologies, could fix what had been broken. Not now. "I've lost my way, Mom," he said, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this, how to fix me." Evelyn's gaze softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. "You've already made your choice, Tom," she replied, her tone gentle but resolute. "And so have I. I can't go back to that life. I won't. I've moved on." Tom's face fell, the full weight of her words sinking in. He took a slow step backward, as if the space between them had suddenly become too vast to cross. His eyes searched hers one last time, but there was no pleading left in them, no hope that she would change her mind. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading down the hall, leaving Evelyn standing in the doorway. She didn't watch him leave. She didn't need to. It was done. She closed the door gently behind her, a soft click marking the end of the conversation, the end of the relationship that had never really been what she had hoped it would be. She didn't feel sadness. Not anymore. There was no anger, no resentment. There was only peace. The silence that followed was hers. She could feel it filling the space, stretching out around her, wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. She had walked away, and for the first time in a long while, she felt whole. It wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Later that evening, Luke came by. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. He simply sat with her, working on the charity event they were planning, side by side in a quiet understanding. As they worked, Evelyn found herself reflecting on everything that had led her to this point. The courage it had taken to make these decisions, the strength it had required to let go of the past, to walk away from the family she had tried to hold together. She had done it. She had freed herself. And as she looked at Luke, she knew that the life she had built, the legacy she had created, would live on. It wasn't about what Tom or Rachel thought. It was about what she had chosen for herself, and the peace she had finally found. The night deepened around them, and the sewing machine hummed steadily in the background. Evelyn no longer felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she felt light, free, and that was enough. The morning light spilled through the curtains of Evelyn's new home, casting golden stripes across the hardwood floors. The apartment was smaller than her last place, but it felt light and airy, the kind of home that whispered peace rather than weighed it down. The walls were bare, except for a few pieces of art she had picked up during her charity events, a reflection of the life she had created in the wake of everything she had left behind. As she sat at the small desk by the window, pen in hand, Evelyn looked out at the view of the sun-dappled street below. The neighborhood was quiet, a far cry from the chaos of the home she had once shared with Tom and Rachel. She felt free here, truly free for the first time in her life. The choice to leave everything behind had been one of the hardest she had ever made, but now it felt like the only thing that had ever truly made sense. The obituary she was writing wasn't an easy task. She had always imagined that when the time came, Tom and Rachel would be the ones to carry her memory forward. But that was before everything had changed, before she realized the truth. They had never really seen her. They had only seen what they wanted her to be. Evelyn's pen hovered over the paper for a moment as she carefully crafted the words. The obituary wasn't for them. It was for Luke. Only Luke. He was the only one who had ever truly seen her for who she was. The only one who understood what it had cost her to walk away from everything, and the only one who would carry her legacy with love and integrity. Evelyn Morris, beloved grandmother, mentor, and advocate for the independence of older women, passed away peacefully at the age of 73. She is survived by her grandson, Luke Morris, who was her greatest joy and the light of her life. Evelyn lived her life on her own terms, carving a path for herself and for others who needed to find their voice. Her legacy of courage, kindness, and strength will live on through the lives she touched and the work she leaves behind. She set the pen down, taking a long breath. This was her truth. This was the family she had built. Luke, and the women she had helped reclaim their voices. This was her real family, not the one bound by blood, but the one shaped by love and choice. A few weeks later, she sat in the back of a small conference room, the hum of conversation surrounding her. The event was a survivor's brunch for women who had overcome family estrangement, and Evelyn had been invited to speak about her own journey. It wasn't easy for her to stand in front of a crowd and share her story, but there was something in her that had shifted. The fear of being judged, of being seen as weak, had dissolved into the quiet strength she had built. As Evelyn stepped up to the podium, she saw the faces in the audience, women of all ages, some smiling with anticipation, others looking weary, as though they were waiting for someone to speak their truth. She began slowly, the words coming easier with each sentence. "I once thought my family was everything," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "I thought that blood would be enough to hold us together, that love was supposed to be unconditional. But I learned the hard way that sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who will hurt you the deepest, and sometimes you have to walk away to find your own voice." The room was silent, every ear tuned in to her words. "I spent years trying to fix relationships that were never meant to be fixed," she continued. "I tried to make myself smaller, quieter, more patient, just to keep the peace. But the truth is, I was lost. I was losing myself. It wasn't until I let go, until I walked away, that I found who I truly was." A woman in the front row raised her hand, her voice shaking. "How did you do it? How did you walk away when everyone else was telling you not to?" Evelyn met her gaze, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "I did it because I finally realized that the only person I needed to answer to was myself. And when I stopped waiting for someone else's permission to be happy, everything changed. I stopped defining myself by the people who had let me down, and I started defining myself by the strength I had found within. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to choose yourself." The room filled with quiet nods, and Evelyn could see the weight of her words settling into the faces around her. She wasn't just speaking to them about family estrangement. She was speaking to their hearts, their own journeys of reclaiming who they were, of learning to live for themselves. After the event, as the women gathered to share their own stories, Evelyn felt a quiet satisfaction in the connection they shared. She had become part of something bigger than herself. A sisterhood of women who had learned to thrive in the face of loss, who had built families not based on obligation, but on choice. That evening, after the event, Evelyn returned to her apartment, where Luke was waiting for her. He had helped her with the planning of the event, offering ideas for the auction and lending his support in every way he could. He looked up when she walked in, his face lighting up with pride. "You are amazing, Grandma," he said, his voice full of admiration. "You really got through to them." Evelyn smiled, taking a seat beside him. "I think we all got through to each other, Luke. We all needed to hear that it's okay to walk away from what hurts us, to build our own path, our own family." Luke leaned in, his eyes serious now. "You've changed so many lives, Grandma. I'm proud of you." Evelyn placed her hand on his, the weight of his words settling in her chest. "And I'm proud of you, Luke. You're part of the family I've built, the one I've chosen." As they sat there together, Evelyn felt something inside her shift. She had started out on this journey thinking she was alone, thinking that her worth had to be validated by others. But now, she knew the truth. Her true family was the one she had created, built from love, strength, and the courage to choose herself. Her phone buzzed and Evelyn glanced down. It was a message from a producer who had been at the event. They wanted to turn her story into a TV series. For a moment, she simply stared at the message. Then, with a quiet laugh, she set the phone aside. The world was paying attention now, but it was no longer her family's approval she sought. Her legacy had already begun. The doors to the new cancer center opened with a soft swoosh, welcoming Evelyn into a space that had been built not just with brick and mortar, but with hope. Her footsteps echoed through the shiny new floors, the faint hum of busy workers and staff blending with the soft murmur of patients and families. She had been instrumental in funding this project. Her donations had provided not just the resources, but the heart to make it happen. A plaque on the wall near the entrance caught her eye. Her name, elegantly engraved, stood beside a simple message: "In memory of Evelyn Morris, for her unwavering commitment to those who need it most." It was a small thing, a plaque no bigger than her palm, yet it felt like a quiet victory. It wasn't about recognition, at least, not anymore. This was something more profound. It was the mark of a life well lived, of a woman who had, in her own way, created a ripple effect in the lives of others. Her contributions had left a lasting impact. And this cancer center, this place of healing, was just one testament to that. Evelyn ran her fingers gently over the plaque, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of realization. The life she had built had not been in vain. She had given her energy, her time, her heart, and in return, she had created something tangible. This center would help people, just like she had helped herself, just like she had helped countless women reclaim their independence. As she continued through the center, a staff member approached her, greeting her with a warm smile. Evelyn could see the gratitude in their eyes, but it wasn't the kind of gratitude that came from obligation. It was real, sincere, the kind that came from knowing that her actions had made a difference. "Thank you for everything you've done, Ms. Morris," the woman said, her voice filled with appreciation. "This place wouldn't be the same without your support." Evelyn smiled softly. "I just did what needed to be done," she replied, her voice steady. "It's the people here that make it what it is." She paused for a moment, looking around, her heart filled with both joy and sadness. Joy for the people who would walk through these doors and find hope, and sadness because of all the years she had spent feeling unseen, unloved. But now, here, she felt exactly where she was meant to be. She wasn't doing this for Tom, Rachel, or anyone else anymore. She was doing it for herself, for the women who needed her, and for the future she had built from the ground up. Later that day, Luke arrived at her apartment, his art portfolio tucked under his arm. He was growing so quickly, no longer the unsure boy who had once been torn between his parents' battles, but a young man carving out his own space in the world. When he entered, he grinned, his eyes sparkling with pride. "Grandma, I've got something to show you," he said eagerly, setting the portfolio down on the table between them. Evelyn, who had been sitting by the window reflecting on the day, turned to him with a smile. "What is it?" she asked, her voice warm with affection. Luke opened the portfolio, revealing a collection of paintings he had been working on, vibrant landscapes, portraits of people he had met at various events, and even a few abstract pieces. But it was the last one that caught her eye. It was a painting of Evelyn herself, her silhouette, bathed in sunlight, standing tall in front of a sea of flowers. "I painted this for you," Luke said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "It's you, Grandma. You're the light, the way out of all the darkness." Evelyn's chest tightened as she looked at the painting. She hadn't seen herself like this before. The strong, graceful woman standing in front of a field of flowers was not the woman she had been years ago. This was the woman she had become. She placed a hand over her heart, her voice thick. "Luke, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, Grandma," he said softly, sitting down beside her. "You've always been my light. You've shown me that I don't have to be anyone I'm not. That's what this painting is about. It's for you, and it's for all the people you've helped." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes, but she held them back, not wanting to let the emotions overwhelm her. Instead, she reached for Luke's hand, squeezing it gently. "You've always been my light too, Luke. You're part of the family I've built, and I'm so proud of you." They sat together for a long while, the weight of their bond solidifying in that quiet space. Luke had become a part of her journey, a reflection of the strength and resilience she had spent her life cultivating. Later, as Evelyn sat at her desk, she pulled out her journal. She hadn't written in it for a while, but tonight, it felt important to capture her thoughts. Her pen moved fluidly across the pages, each word a reflection of the peace she had found. You are what I leave behind, not them. The world will know my name, but it's you who will carry the light forward. I've built this life for you, Luke, and for the women who need to find their own path. You are the future, and I am proud of you. She closed the journal, her heart full. She had done it. She had built the legacy she wanted. Her name would live on, not in the way her family had once imagined, but in the lives she had changed. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Gina, her lawyer, standing with a final binder in her hands. Evelyn, Gina said, handing her the binder. Everything is in place. Your legacy is secure. Evelyn took it, the weight of the binder not heavy, but reassuring. Thank you, Gina, she said, her voice steady. As Gina left, Evelyn sat back down by the window, holding the binder close. It was the final piece. Everything was set. A soft ding from her phone brought her back to the present. She picked it up and saw a mysterious card in her inbox. No return address. The message was simple. You were right. She paused, her mind racing. She didn't know who had sent it, but somehow, she knew it was the affirmation she had been waiting for all along. The journey wasn't over yet, but she was ready for whatever came next. Evelyn smiled softly, raising her glass in a quiet toast to herself, to her independence, to the peace she had earned. The world was waiting for her. The air in the auditorium was thick with excitement, the buzz of new beginnings swirling around Evelyn as she sat in the crowded hall. She looked at the sea of young faces, each filled with anticipation, each on the cusp of their next chapter. But her eyes were fixed on one person in particular, Luke. He sat a few rows ahead of her, his posture more confident than she had ever seen. The young man who had once been caught in the middle of a broken family was now stepping into a future of his own, and Evelyn could hardly contain the pride swelling in her chest. He didn't know it, but in this moment, Luke was the living embodiment of everything she had worked for, the reason she had fought so hard for her freedom, her voice, and her independence. The speaker on stage welcomed the incoming class to the university with warm words, but it was a line from one of Evelyn's own blog posts that caught her attention, drifting through the air like an echo. Sometimes your bloodline ends with betrayal, but your legacy begins with love. Her heart skipped a beat. She had written those words long ago, never thinking they would take on the significance they held now. In that moment, Evelyn realized just how far she had come. She had walked away from the family who had failed to understand her. She had built something stronger in its place, a family of choice, of respect, and of love. Beside her, Natalie, her lifelong friend who had been with her through thick and thin, reached over and gave her hand a comforting squeeze. Natalie's smile was full of quiet admiration, as though she understood the profound shift that had taken place in Evelyn's life. You did it. Evelyn, Natalie whispered, her voice barely audible over the speaker's words. Evelyn smiled back, a tear glimmering in her eye, though she quickly blinked it away. We did it, Nat, she replied softly, her voice thick with emotion. I couldn't have done this without you. Luke's name was called, and the crowd erupted into applause. Evelyn watched as he walked across the stage to receive his college orientation package. His face, radiant with the confidence that had eluded him for so long, was the one thing in the world that truly mattered. He was ready for this, ready for whatever came next. Evelyn remained seated as the ceremony continued, her gaze fixed on Luke as he found his place in the world. She knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of his journey. But it was a journey he would walk without the burden of his past, and for that, she was eternally grateful. The ceremony ended, and the crowd began to filter out. But Evelyn stayed behind for a few moments, savoring the feeling of contentment that had settled deep in her chest. This was her moment. This was what she had fought for. As she walked out of the auditorium, she felt a gentle breeze on her face, the kind that promised new beginnings. Luke caught up with her outside, his eyes shining with excitement. "Grandma," he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. "Can you believe it? I'm here. This is it." Evelyn chuckled softly, her heart full. "I've always believed in you, Luke," she said, reaching for his hand. "You've always had what it takes." They walked together in silence for a moment, side by side, until they reached her apartment. Evelyn didn't need to say anything more. Everything she had ever hoped for was unfolding before her, and the peace she felt was a reflection of the strength it had taken to get here. That evening, after a quiet dinner with Luke, Evelyn sat down at her desk to write her final journal entry. Her fingers danced across the paper, capturing the weight of everything she had achieved, everything she had fought for. "I survived twice. Once when I was told to leave, and again when I found my way back to myself. I walked away, and healed in peace they'll never touch." She set the pen down, feeling the finality of it all. The life she had built, bit by bit, stitch by stitch, was now complete. She had secured her legacy, and Luke would carry it forward with the same strength she had always known he possessed. The phone on her desk buzzed, a reminder that the world would continue to spin. But Evelyn wasn't worried about that anymore. Everything that truly mattered was right in front of her. With a contented sigh, she poured herself a cup of tea, feeling the warmth spread through her as she reflected on the journey she had taken. She raised the cup in a quiet toast to herself, to her independence, her strength, and the woman she had become. As the evening settled in, she set the last legal folder on the table, the weight of it not a burden, but a reassurance. She had made her choices. She had secured her future. The world could wait. Evelyn had everything she needed right here, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly free.